it's a architecture. No, it's kind of a design that is concerned with planning and design of built in natural environments. The design of sustainable landscape encompasses the three pillars of sustainable development: economic well-being, social equity, and environmental protections. It takes care of all three and binds us together with that. The main goals of sustainable design are to conserve water and energy, reducing waste and decrease runoff. For a brighter and greener sustainable future, we should and start acting now. With this, we shall start the today's webinar on designing our future sustainable landscapes. We shall start with a short introduction about who we are, which shall be followed by a brief session by Ms. Priyanka Tiwari, Ethos Explorer and Ideation. Then we'll have our guest speaker, Mr. Ravinder Punde, co-founder and principal designer of Design Cell, sharing his views, which shall be followed by question answer session with the sir and a vote of thanks. I would like to request all the participants to kindly keep on writing your question and answers in the question and answer box throughout the session, which we'll be answering in the later part. Capricot Technologies, a Win0 company. We are having a legacy of about 3 decades, which have now become partner of choice of AEC industry. Capricot Technologies is one of the biggest platinum partners of Autodesk and Bentley, along with an authorized training center. Today, with over more than 6 offices across India and a team of more than 250 plus inspired team members, we are serving over 20,000 plus customers in the building, infrastructure, and manufacturing, and large number of industries throughout India. Win0. We now have a global footprint with US CAD in US, CADline in UK, Capricot in India, and A2K in Australia. Win0 is a technology partner of choice for AEC and manufacturing industries globally, not just here. We help customers achieve technological and sustainable leadership through digitization. Connectivity of processes and design ideas through digitization is the fastest way for us to achieve more and use less. With that aim, we shall move ahead and create a more greener and a future full of energy. I would like to invite Ms. Priyanka. Over to you.
Thanks, Naman. Hello, everyone. A very good afternoon. I'm Priyanka, Ideation Explorer at Ethos. I will be quickly taking you all through the competition brief. Just before that, Naman, is my voice audible clearly?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Will the slides be displayed? Yeah. You can move on to the next one. The global pandemic and lockdown have boosted technological advancements in work-life pattern. Today, global companies have adapted to hybrid mode of work from home, and tier 2, tier 3 cities in India can potentially emerge as business hubs and open fantastic opportunities, which will require urban development reforms and development of infrastructure. This opportunity will enable the qualified young professionals to work from home, stay closer to family, and have a better work-life balance, thereby increasing their productivity and decreasing the pressure on the megacities. But to achieve this, we need to reimagine the environment to fulfill the aspirations of globally aspiring Indian youths from towns. With this background, Design Advance Emerging Towns Narrowing the Gap Between Home and Work has been launched by Capricot in association with Autodesk and Ethos. This is a call for intervention to design a mixed-use development program for a small town that invokes qualities of well-being, inclusivity, and an integrated approach. Next, please. The site needs to be selected as per the following. Pick a town with population of less than 1 million. Choose a plot area of 1 to 2 hectares to develop a mixed-use hub with more than one function from residential, retail, office, entertainment, social hubs, and flex buildings. The locally applicable bylaws or NPC codes can be followed in their absence. Site for adaptive reuse may be picked if adhering to other criteria mentioned in the brief. Next, please. This competition is open to all undergraduates and postgraduate students of architecture and design, as well as 2022 graduates. You can participate individually or in a group of maximum 3 members. We are looking for solutions that are innovative, futuristic, and net zero energy efficient. You can register and check the brief at website designadvance.in. The registration deadline being 20th September 2022 and the submission deadline is 3rd October. We hope you will participate and help us spread the word about this competition. Over to you, Naman.
Thank you, Priyanka. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Ravinder Punde to share his views. He's the co-founder and principal designer of Design Cell. He has renowned leadership and commitment towards environmental sensitive creations for urban design, large-scale urban and detailed projects. He has vast experience in coordination of teams for large projects, including the world in US, Middle East. He has been associated with Mumbai International Airport as well as the domestic terminal. He has been associated with the SPA Delhi as a visiting faculty and has been principal of Academy of Architecture, Mumbai from 2010 to 12. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and actually, I was just before this conversation started, this session started, I was actually asking who set the title, and it was a very nice accident that I think Shweta set the title, and I quite liked it, and I grabbed it. So I think what I'm going to do is actually, I will speak more about a worldview that I think is very, very essential for doing any kind of design work. And so I'm going to put on table some issues which I think are very critical. And they will hopefully kind of, help the students to kind of construct their own vision, so to say, for the proposed development. And how do you see it? Because much of it is actually perceptions, and I'll talk about it as we go through, as how do you see the problems? And many of these things then kind of emerge and entangle with the way you see the world around you. And so I think it's very important that we kind of develop a larger perspective of where do we all want to go. And it's linked also to some of the emerging questions of, the nature of our development, the ideas of imaginations of our development versus, or I don't know whether versus is the right word, but versus the crisis that we are in terms of environment, and all of these issues are actually are intersecting each other, shall I say, in a very, very interesting way. But these are very, very serious questions. And so I think design ideas have to emerge from this kind of a contextual sense of it. So what I did was I actually liked the title so much that it says designing the future, and then it talks about and then it says sustainable landscape. So I have kind of stretched the word landscapes, okay? And like we use the word architect, I guess there are other designers here also, but when we say Sachin Tendulkar was the architect of the success of the World Cup, we mean that he kind of, imagined the whole thing, and he crafted the whole thing, and he got people around him. And so the architect's role is a very, very, all-inclusive kind of a role. Such is the case with the term landscape also. So I have broken down my presentation, but my discussion and my thinking in two parts. One is I'm going to talk about the landscape of the context, okay? And then I will talk about the context of landscape. And so you may begin to, you probably understand what I mean by this. When I say the landscape of the context is that we have to understand about the self first. When we design something, we need to know the self. Now, when I say self, I don't mean me. I mean us. I mean the community. I mean the context, okay? So for me, the landscape of the context, where does all this sit in? becomes very important. And then, of course, we will come to the question of how do you respond to it and what is the kind of landscape that you want to develop for these kind of thoughts and thinking. Okay. And then, of course, in the question and answer, I'm quite happy to answer very more specific and pointed questions on the landscape. But I'll just take you through some of these thinkings that I've kind of just noted down. So, one of the first things that came to my mind is an interesting distinction that we should all make is between the home and the house. If you look up the Wikipedia definition, or any of the definitions for that matter, a house is and the word house is also used very broadly when you want to kind of envelope something or enclose something, right? So it's an artifact, it's a building, that's the house, right? But what makes a home? What makes a home is probably relationships, people, life around it. And so when I think of, and there was a reference in the brief to the pandemic and all of that happened. So when we think about 25 million people, migrants, walked back home, they did not walk back to the house. They walked back to people. They walked back to care. They walked back to compassion, right? And so the idea of home is much more about people and probably a little bit about space, okay? And so I want to kind of begin with that understanding. I want to kind of throw open that larger understanding and the interpretation of the idea of home. The second important point that I wanted to make here was that actually in 2011, so it's almost a little over a decade ago, Ishwar Ahluwalia was commissioned by the Planning Commission, I think, to write a report on or put together a report on the state of urban infrastructure. Okay, and she pointed out some very important things. So the reason I want to talk about this is we are talking about small and medium-sized towns where we want to look at this design proposition. But I want to highlight some very, very important things about, and kind of, so when I say I want to understand self, I exactly mean this, that I want to begin to understand, I want all of you to begin to understand what our context is, okay? So when we are discussing the idea of work from home, as I said, and I'll come back to the question of what home means, okay? Because, and also I can tell you from my own personal experience, because ever since COVID, we are a 25 people office, Mumbai office, which is all work from home, okay? But I've started thinking that maybe that's not the right word. I should make it work from anywhere. And I'll talk about it a little bit more a little later, because I want to kind of, for all of us, begin to understand what is this landscape of the context that we are talking about. So in 2011, when she wrote this report, I just want to give you pick up a few. It's a very elaborate report. It's about, I think, 60, 70 page report. But basically, I just picked up some numbers to kind of begin to open up your mind to our own realities. So the per capita water availability in most of our urban areas, apart from the bigger cities, was anything between 37 liters to 300 liters per person per day. Okay. Now, just to give you a sense of, I mean, I'm sure most of you probably know, but a bucket is about 20 liters. Okay. So which means that on an average, the poor people had 2 buckets of water available for them per day. Okay. All of this was only available from anything between 1 hour to 6 hours. There is no question of water being available for 24/7. as a system. Mind you, this is of course 2011. Situations may have improved, but my guess is it's not far better. Another interesting statistics for you to know is 4,861 out of 5,161 towns do not have any kind of sewage system in our country, or did not have in 2011. Okay. 21% of the wastewater was disposed of, only 21% was actually treated. The rest, 80%, is just kind of drained out without any treatment into the natural system. Okay, so things like that. So that is the context. That's the landscape of the context that one is talking about. The other thing that I want to talk about is at the level of the home, I think we need to understand, given this infrastructure, the difficulty to survive and live is very, very high. In fact, we have not yet spoken about the size of houses. In smaller towns where we are not so much system dependent, because as you know from the numbers, that the system is not supporting you, right? The infrastructure is not adequate, okay? So we need to understand the fact that there is now interdependence. The infrastructure is interpersonal interdependency, right? So when I say, and this is, I'm speaking from a very, very definite personal experience for having run a cloud-based office for 3 years. And the constant struggle that we and some of us have had in the organization is to make it comfortable for people to work, okay? So here it is, think about it. That suddenly somebody has to get up and take his grandmother to the hospital because now he is there at home, right? There is a power outage. There is no guarantee of power supply. Income levels are not really great. As a family, you really can't get alternative energy systems. So it's a very complex situation. So we have borrowed the word, or rather we are influenced by this idea and the term work from home. But what we need to make a distinction, and I'm saying this, that it's not all too bad. I would think of it the other way around, that a mother can look after her child as well while she's working, there are universal advantages to these situations also. But as designers and thinkers, because I call designers thinkers, right? Because you're always thinking about what the future has to be, right? Learning from the past, but we're constantly imagining a future. And how responsibly do we imagine the future is what is our role and responsibility. So coming back to this, so it's very important for all of us to understand that the context in which we talk, or when we borrow these terms from a world where some of the things are taken for granted, the system will work for you. When I say system, there is no such thing as voltage fluctuation. There is no such thing as power outage. There is no such thing as no water today, that I have to go and fetch water from somewhere for the family, or any of those kind of things, right? And so you are in this home environment where you are constantly now struggling to manage these things. Again, let me warn you, it's not just that it's all very negative, but these are ground realities. So when you go to small towns, I'm going to recommend you please walk and talk to people who understand what it is. It, of course, creates opportunities, but I think there are other questions which you may want to deep dive into and understand what this thing means. So, environmentally speaking, here is the crucial question. If 20% of the water is treated and left into the drains and therefore into the rivers or the ponds and this and that and the other, 80% is constantly polluting it, right? Now, we all know that we can now look at alternative systems. But when we look at alternative systems, then the question of energy comes into play. So it's a complex ways. And so we will look at alternative developmental systems, right? Alternative methods of looking at the systems that can work without energy, or bioprocesses and all of those things, like constructed wetlands, and you kind of treat water naturally. So I'm coming to some bit of the context of the landscape. All of this, mind you, has a certain space demand. Okay? Anything, anywhere where you make shifts, you will please remember that everything that you talk about demands space. Okay, so, and I will point out a few things, hopefully if we have the time, about how these are space extensive. But the larger question that we actually have, and I want to put on your table, is the real question is it's not a question about adequate technologies to recycle something or reuse something or repurpose something. Actually, the problem lies in the first source. Where do you get the water from? Look at Mumbai, or look at any of our cities. In fact, that Ishwar Ahluwalia report points out that on an average, a large metropolis draws water from 200 kilometers away from where it is. Okay. So obviously, its footprint, its sustenance footprint is expanding. And here is a question for you, young minds. Can we reduce that footprint? Is there a way that we kind of, generate a architecture which then is able to, or a landscape for that matter, and architecture, for me, there is no difference. Actually, as I'm getting older, the lines are blurring in my head like nobody's business, right? I don't know when urban design stops and architecture begins, and I don't know when landscape begins and urban design finishes. So it's such a beautiful continuum that I floated between all of these things. So it becomes very critical for all of us to begin to question and think. Take, for example, I mean, if you really ask, what has design and planning done that a city like Mumbai that gets 2,500 mm of rain has to go 200 kilometers away to Vaitarna to fetch water? Something is not right? And the question therefore then comes to, what is the landscape of the city that will allow it to do it? And that big question then can be, filtered and narrowed and brought down to the question of the building, and the question of habitation, and the question of, or the biggest question of, culture and practices, right? And I'm just deviating from my this thing because I'm in the flow of some thought. So if you really think, the market is doing some things, right? If you really look at how do we measure economic growth, one of the most important ingredients of economic growth is consumption. Now, the question we may want to ask is how far, how long, how much we will consume. And if we are going to consume, it's going to demand resources. If it is going to demand resources, we will go as far as we can to draw these resources. And if we reach the end of our so-called territory of nation, then we throw out new ideas to the world called globalization, so that we can then go further away and get what we want to get. Okay, so this is a fundamental question about consumption, right? Consumption and frugality. And so therefore, in my understanding, or rather, I think it's kind of a global understanding, that we all know that we don't want to go back to, living in the jungle, so to say, or going back to a very basic lifestyle. We also don't want to go to a point where we consume so much that we begin to become destructive. All right. So then the word that sits in between the two extremes is sustainable. Right. But now the sustainable, the world of markets actually begins to capture everything. So now you have a rating, and you have, all kind of agencies in this world that tell you, you're sustainable now. You've done this good. But we all don't know really whether what is the impact of this new form of consumption. It's just another form of consumption. Okay. Are we saying we are going to live with lesser air conditioning? No. Are we saying we are going to drive lesser? Not really. So there is another beautiful small snippet of a video I saw, I think it was on Facebook or somewhere, where it said that if every car was to become an electrically charged car and the batteries for it will require a lot of mining. And that mining will almost kind of scrape off the whole earth, right? So these are things these are very complex questions. I don't think any of us have an answer. But I think as a worldview, it's very important that we, within ourselves, when we work with the pencil, when the pencil touches the paper, this should touch your heart. It's extremely important that these questions become very, very central to your ideas of design and development. Okay, so as I said, the first source is a question, and I think that first source being a question actually takes me in my own thinking to the Gandhian idea, not to again go to the extreme, but the Gandhian question, shall we say, of can every building become entirely dependent on itself? Now, for it to become what it becomes, or a landscape to become what it becomes, a building and the landscape, it will require a cultural practice. I had taken students to Jaisalmer, okay, not to glorify or not to look at the beautiful architecture of it. Of course, that was one of the agendas, and measure, draw it beautifully, and draw the beauty of all those, which is a known thing. But what I took the students with the question of what is it that a place like Jaisalmer can happen in the middle of the desert and be so culturally rich, right? What did it take? And at the heart of it were certain practices that they developed because they knew how to manage. I mean, they learned in a very interesting symbiotic manner to deal and develop a relationship with their environment and their resources. And so they develop certain cultural practices, and that develops certain artifacts, right? So when they bathe a baby, that water then goes, and so the cattle shed is right down. And there are many, many interesting processes and phenomena where that water is then consumed by the cattle and all of that kind of stuff. So they kind of created their own cycles within them and created some beautiful artifacts out of it, which became a cultural, object, so to say. So I think I'm trying to establish, or rather struggling to kind of connect many things, which is to say that your resources become, and your way of living and your immediate environment has a very strong relationship. That strong relationship actually, in my opinion, is best expressed in local languages. So the other issue is the decline of local languages, okay? Because with the decline of local languages, you will realize that your sense of environment will start getting gradually dismantled. You will not, for example, I know in Marathi poetry, there is such a huge reference to so many elements which are very local to our region. And they're constantly being written about, spoken about, talked about, right? Now, but all of that is changing, right? You take the film industry. I always give this example. The monsoon was thought to be such a beautiful thing that we all spoke about. I mean, we all remember, at least in our times, the Raj Kapoor song of Pyar Hua, Ikrar Hua with an umbrella, and basically it's raining and everybody's enjoying the rain, and right? And there is a mood of loving, giving, romance, and all of that. But now when it begins to rain, the mama will call her daughter to say, come back home, it's not safe. The question to be asked is, did the rain do it? Of course not. It's the way we build. It's the way we built the city, right? The rain is the same. So that is the bigger issue for all of us to think and rethink of how do we build, and what is it that the cities that we have are the way that they're built. What is it doing? What all is it destroying? And so I'm just again going to. There's one more thought that crossed my mind is, there's also the other thing that today we have been so very pushed to consume by what is called marketing that we don't even realize that we are being influenced. I'm sure your generation must have seen that ad on TV which says, "Ye to dabba hai, ye dabba," right? Now, when you see that ad, you realize that what is that advertiser trying to do? Is trying to create a consumption demand, right? Or when you see this young guy with his car standing out and saying, "You've arrived," right? Because you own this car. We all know we can't manage the traffic in Mumbai, but we all want to buy cars. I mean, buy cars and sell cars. I myself, of course, have cars, but that's besides the point. So if you really think in many ways, this is what is happening to all of us. So we'd be careful when we design and think of, don't forget, when we design, we are designing consumption. Okay. So, so let me come down. So that's a larger, broader thing about speaking from, dwelling units, houses, values, and what is being constructed. Let me come to a little bit of to another point, which is about the small and medium-sized towns, so to say. So at in my introduction, I think I'm a trustee and a founder of a school called the School of Environment and Architecture, SEE. And though I'm not very active now with the school, we did some of our faculty and students we teach through research projects. So they did a research on 6 towns in South India. And the idea is to cover the whole country on the small and medium-sized towns to understand what's happening in these small and medium-sized towns, and particularly the implication on housing. And why am I talking about housing? Because we were talking in the brief, there is the question is about work from home. So what's happening? See, one of the biggest problems in the housing, larger housing framework is that we are constantly talking through deficits, number, construction technology, all of that. But the real problem is, the real issue is somewhere else. If you really see the amount of houses that we've been able to build since our independence, decade after decade, we've fallen short of the targets just dismally, right? It's terrible. We have not even reached 8%, 10% of what has been targeted year after year. Because it's simply not possible to build your city out or build your environment. So it is our belief that it is the idea of the home, or everyone has a shelter. Let's face it, right? Most of them. I would say at least 90% have a shelter. They may not qualify because we define them very interestingly, right? They don't qualify as homes. So I very often say that I don't want to use the word slums. Okay, I want to use the word that they are urban vernacular, because that is an effort by people themselves to build their own homes, right? Now, in our education and in our academic environment, we're kind of constantly taught about a formal architectural expression. And so we are so influenced by that anything out of our own imagination is then not it. It's the other thing, right? So it is the informal thing. But that's not true. We have to thank those guys because they are the ones who live in the city, service the city, manage to struggle and survive without any support system. Right? So I think we need to understand how and why we define certain things in a certain way. Okay, and this is introspection. So when you design and when you run your pencil on paper, there is actually introspection happening, right? So keep that in mind. That's something very important. So what's happening in most of these small towns? The inner city is transforming, right? That's one thing that is certainly happening. Inner cities have, I mean, as I said, there were 6 towns we studied, 6 towns that we studied. There are 6 towns that we studied in 3 states, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, right? The school study. And so one thing that is happening is, because these are all old towns, some of them have caste-based divisions in the inner city and many of these kind of things. So the inner city is gradually getting transformed, okay? Then the other thing that is happening is that in most of these places, what we found, and this is again maybe specific to these towns that we studied or the states that we studied, but there is a huge amount of remittances that are coming, and that is now pushing the house type and also the overall urban landscape, because they are building, right? People are building from their own remittances. There is also, because of remittances, new forms of development that is occurring on the perimeters of these towns, where there are large townships where you get plots. There are now, gated communities that are coming up, and all these kind of things that are occurring. The third important thing is that these small towns are also like retirement homes for people. That people work in urban areas and then go to these medium and small towns to spend the rest of their life. The other important thing is that some of these towns are actually becoming university towns, or they're becoming institutional hits, right? So all of these have a certain kind of demand that it generates on, and pressure it begins to put on the housing type. And as I said, that we may not be able to build our way through this. So you may want to really rethink the question of whether we build new or whether we begin to retrofit the landscape, okay? Then, and landscape again in the broader term. So there are many such things that are, many such processes that are happening. I don't know how I'm placed in terms of time. How much time do I have? Okay. And then some of these towns are also along some of the principal industrial accesses and stuff like that, that connect with the road network that is increasing. There's another kind of land development that is happening in these places. Okay, so I am going to now move away from this broad, our own contextual thing, to a slightly larger and a broader, even a larger and a broader understanding of, shall I say, the landscapes. Okay, and so one of the biggest things today that we are facing is climate change, right? And we are talking about, and we are almost on the verge to say that for the first time in the history of the Earth, we're talking of a geological change because of human intervention, and we call it the Anthropocene. So there's a lot of debate and discourse on this question of Anthropocene, but what it basically means is, for the first time, the Earth changes are occurring because of human intervention. Okay, and so it is, to put it very broadly, it is therefore also considered to be disruptive to the environment. And this is essentially, basically because one of the major causes is the conflict between natural systems and the new systems that we have created through human imagination, which is the economics. I think the moderator just now mentioned economic well-being with environmental well-being. So that's what is happening. So now let's come to, I'm going to give you my own, shall I say, a theoretical framework that I kind of came across. And when I started analyzing and thinking about how I think of design, and in the academic environment where I was teaching at sea, these are some of the things that kind of emerged. Mind you, I am basically, by and large, a practice person. So I am an opinion person. I am not a researcher. So I rather go by, not rather, I go more by my own experiences in practice and life than really statistical and numerical database studies on this thing. So while I was teaching and practicing, I started figuring out for myself what could be interesting processes of thinking. And so I came up with this formulation of what I call the stratum formulation. So if you all of you are designers, so if you were to think of this idea that I'm going to now elaborate, and think of it as a section, okay? So at the base of it is a natural system, okay? Which is the ground, the terrain, and the sky and the air above it, and the soil and, the subsurface below that line of the surface. Now, there's a friend of mine who also questions the idea of surface, because he says, where does surface begin, right? How much above and how much below and all of that. So anyway, but that's a broader question. Let me just kind of come back to this to say that you have the natural system, which is so I call it stratum 1, okay? The natural system. And there are quite clearly, there is a whole ecology that depends, there is a whole natural cycle that is dependent. The other important thing that happens is all the flows, your water flows and your energy flows and your vegetation flows, the root system being connected, all of it, right? The forest grows and all of that. And then you have the air above you and all of that. So so basically what one is talking is about the natural systems, okay? So that is one layer. I'm just kind of putting in front of you a method of thinking or a method of constructing your questions, okay? So that is one. The second thing is, during the Industrial Revolution and post-Industrial Revolution, human mind created a huge set of new imaginations because of new possibilities, right? And there is no doubt about it that we progressed a lot, but, and there's no denying that there is a far more improved quality of life that we have. But there is, the economic order now begins to generate different flows. Think about it. Now, you want to go from Chennai to Bangalore. Now you want to connect the two. You want to connect it probably in the shortest possible and the most economical way with the least amount of time. Right? So now this is the second layer that we are creating of flows. If you think, why does the drain run along the road? I really don't know. Why should it run along the road? What if I was to begin to honor and respect stratum 1, the natural system? Can it? It possibly can, right? But we kind of developed a overall understanding that this is how it has to happen. right? So now what has started happening is that there are very serious, what shall I say, intersections of the natural system and the modern economic new system that is thinking. What it also did along with it is that the economic order, or Brian Adam, not Brian Adam, sorry, the theory of the golden arm, so to say, that the theory of, or the idea of ownership, right? And the idea of territory and borders and boundaries, right? Natural systems don't know this, right? They don't understand this human geography that we create. They don't understand these boundaries and plot boundaries that we create. Very often, I'm sure many of us, when we do a project in school, we get a certain shaped kind of profile, and that's the plot, and then we do a building within it, without even wondering what's happening by the side. How does this piece of land belong to the overall system of nature? We really don't think about it, right? So, but that's because that's how our thinking has been constructed now, right? And these borders and boundaries have now become revenue records. So we are now become revenue record thinkers. We think only in terms of revenue record, which is why we think of land use. If I take you back a little bit in time, there was very little sense of ownership, right? I could go to the government and say, I want to pick the coconuts on this tree this season. And I would pay the government something, and I could go pick up the coconuts on the tree for that. But the tree and the land never belonged to me, right? Which is called the commons, right? So there are these questions and issues about the idea of ownership as well, territory and boundaries. So basically, territory, boundary, self, me, ownership, and then the systems of the economic order are actually now beginning to conflict with the stratum 1. So the stratum 2 is very often, and that's where the environmental disruption begins to happen, right? But there are many thinkers, designers who have actually thought of this and tried to see how we can let both things happen. And so Ian McCulloch, who's the guru of many things, including GIS now, he thought of a system and a method of looking at the land and the landscape through several layers to begin to understand how development can occur and can work together, can it? And that's something which this system, this second stratum, he never questioned the consumptive quality of this new order, but he did try to see how do we negotiate this this terrain. Okay. The natural system is also very dynamic in terms of time, right? And I think the dimension of time is something which I would want you to really, all of you, think. I think if you begin to see things over time, not in terms of span of time, but even in terms of a series of moments, you'll begin to understand the system in a far more nuanced way than anything else. For example, one of the key questions that we all discuss all the time is, who drew the river? Who has drawn these two lines or two edges of the river? When were they drawn? At what point of time were they drawn? Were they drawn in monsoon? Were they drawn in summer? Will they be different in monsoon and in summer? Right? Gandhi's famous speech happened on the bed of Sabarmati River. But somewhere our understanding of the world and our worldview was so aligned to the world outside of the developed world that we now walled it up to make it into a permanent river, like the French river, right? or like the Thames in London. But that's not the nature of that space. So this is where conflicting imaginations begin to disrupt and create these very challenging conditions. So in the larger landscape, this is something which is very important for all of us to understand. Okay. But your generation has the opportunity with the third stratum. As I told you, think of it as a section. At the base is the ground, right? The natural system. Over it is laid this human imagination system, which is your whole developmental idea. And now there is a third thing that has emerged, which is the cloud. Now, what is cloud doing? Very interesting. The cloud is, over the past post-industrial revolution till now, we created territories and boundaries. The cloud is dismantling all of it, one by one. Think of it. Politically thinking, I mean, the time when it really hit me was the then government could not control Trump and, could not stop him from tweeting all kind of provocative messages, but the cloud did. So here is a question: who is in control? Right? So the empowerment of the cloud is now increasingly becoming omnipresent. And so, again, coming back from that very global kind of a thing, can we now begin to think of the digital world as a great instrument to break barriers of caste, to break barriers of class, to break barriers of gender, to break barriers of haves and the have-nots? Can we create another opportunity? And it is doing it, right? And so the third layer of the cloud is a big opportunity to dismantle anything. Now, as architects, you may want to imagine, or you may want to kind of understand this, that the bookshop is probably gone. Till the other day, me and my wife would go to America, and the only thing that we would do is buy a whole lot of stationery, right? All the markers and the pens and this and that and the other, and buy a whole lot of books and come back. These are the only two things that we would, every year after year, go there and get back. Okay? Today, we don't buy either of them. Because on my iPad, I have a software with which I can work, use all the colors in the world that I could ever put together, and use all sizes of pens and pencils. And I can send a drawing to any corner of the world. And I have a Kindle in my pocket and an iPad, and I read. I don't need the book. I don't need the bookshop right now, right? Some of us who are extremely romantic about the past say, but a bookshop is a bookshop and the feel is a feel. So be it. But it's not going to last for very long for sure, right? So here is a question for architects. What is space then? What is the enclosure? One very important thing. Sitting in enclosures and spending your whole day is a 100-year-old phenomenon, or maybe 150-year-old phenomenon. We have always, as a human race, been outside. Right? Can you now use the cloud to dismantle the idea of an enclosed space and begin to see the outdoor and the external as the space? Right? Or should the veranda be back? Should the trellis be back? Is that the space? Isn't that far more economical? Isn't that far more enjoyable? Right? The poet, there is no poetry talking about an air-conditioned room. There is poetry that is talking about flowers and rain, and right. That's the charm and the beauty of this of these spaces. So here is an opportunity that we can actually now begin to think of space and spatiality anew completely. We can begin to belong to a landscape, right? And to that effect, that's where I bring back the question of, the landscape, the context of landscape. This is the context of landscape. If we build less, we could be less disruptive, right? Indeed, there will be a whole lot of questions about, what else will it trigger? What else will it generate? These are very many questions. There could be impacts on the other side which we can't see, like the battery thing that I told you. But yet, I think as architects, we have this opportunity to think of retaining the flows, let the water be, let the water flow, let the plants grow, and many more things. So I mean, you can go on and on and on to say. So here is a great opportunity of the new times for all of us. Okay. And how do we play with it, and how do we generate great conditions and new conditions for our environment? The key here is that through your architecture, actually, you can construct a culture and a cultural practice which will then respond and engage with nature. And you can yet be in the middle of the best form of technology. Actually, tomorrow's world is a world that is going to be one of the best periods that I can think of, when biosciences and technologies meet. And that's already happening, right? We have an irrigation consultant who told me a very interesting thing, that the Abu Dhabi government has now developed an irrigation system which is not dependent on any mechanism or clocks or anything like that, but has developed a sensor system that when a plant requires water, it emits certain enzymes or some signals, and then that irrigation system reads it and emits just as much water as is needed, and just wets the soil. Okay? Here you are. A bioprocess is talking to a technology. So that is the world that you are getting into. But I think it's also very important for all of us to remember. For us, we have to constantly think, how will it benefit the last man? How do we use this technology to really benefit and spread the benefit of all that we are doing and thinking to the last man? And it's possible now with this technology. So these are some of the questions. So I have put down some 3 or 4 questions. So one of the things, as I mentioned, just to sum up, there are some questions that I want to put to you as design thinkers, and that, so the question is, can architecture not be just net zero, but be productive? Can it produce? Can it contribute to the city, right? And imagine a whole network of buildings that are producing everything for themselves, right? And not being consumers, but are actually becoming contributors to the system. So what is that architecture that will do it? And that's something which all of us have to strive and work towards, okay? Then it's extremely important in the context of this climate change. We really have to worry about how, like Glenn Murcutt says, how do we tread gently on nature, right? We let the flows be. And as I just said a little while ago, we can actually begin to use the cloud and the technology that's available to us to actually question the physicality of space, okay? And then finally, of course, as I said, how do we break these barriers of class, caste, and gender through some of these issues some of these technologies and some of our thinking that we have, that we develop over the thing. So I can only wish you all the best, and think new. Ask questions to yourself. As you draw, this tip has a lot of questions. Okay? So go ahead and do it. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such inspiring views, sir. This session was really insightful. The way you handled phenomenal, sir. I'll say your perspective towards the innovative urban outlook is really commendable, sir. Really a nice experience. So thank you so much for that, sir. Now will we head over to the question and answers. Request all to put in your question answers in the Q&A box. So, sir, with that, I just have a question in my head. I would like to ask you. Yeah. So, sir, how do you feel how important is digital transformation which we are having? As you mentioned, like earlier we used to go for the books and the stationery. Now everything is transforming to a digital approach. How do you think, are we transitioning for a sustainable approach? Is it just because of the mandates, or is it because of a need, or it's just because, compelled to a guideline? So your views about it, sir.
Well, I don't understand your question on the guideline part of it, but if you the larger question is this is the new way. I mean, I can give you there is a small country called Estonia. I don't know how many of you know about that place. I also kind of stumbled upon it very recently due to my son kind of went there. And think of it, I mean, to me, it was a very interesting, and he went and met somebody, and there was this discussion with that person, with an Estonian. When they decoupled from Russia, they were thinking about what to do, and how do you kind of build your country. So they embrace this technology fully. But so they have Europe on one side and Russia behind them, right? Okay. So they made this decision to do it, and they have everything digitized. I can vote through a blockchain system. So tomorrow there might be nobody on that land or on that surface, but the country will still exist. Right? That's the power of the possibilities of the cloud. So there are huge possibilities of what can happen. 5 years ago, when I was actually looking at these things very carefully, there are brain sensors that they were experimenting with, that you could think of something and you could move another object without touching it. Here it is. I mean, it's something which is going to happen for sure. There is no doubt about it, and it is the new world. We better embrace it. I don't see any other beautiful thing to happen.
Thank you so much, sir. So we have a question. I'll just say it. Is it a part of green building concepts now being followed in other countries to reduce emissions and save electric power consumption, being followed in Gulf countries?
I don't know. See, this is the point I made a little while ago. I really don't look at green building systems that very seriously. They're one way or the other, they consume. In the operating cost, they don't. But let me give you an example. I always give this example to my students. And this may be embedded even in the digital question. Okay, but I'm just putting this forth on the table. What's the price of a Coke can?
It's 30 rupees. 35.
35. What do you think it includes? Water, sugar, some hidden formula, and a aluminum foil can, right?
Right.
Right. Now let's add some costs to this. degradation of the can, right? Then let's add the cost to mining of aluminum and the disruption of the environment and therefore restructuring them. So the way the market is structured is actually, the costs at the two ends are not a part of the cost that society pays all the time. Right? And so while Coke makes, I have nothing against Coke, but I'm just saying I drink Coke also. But while Coke makes that profit, we spend money or we spend energy, effort, or sufferings because of the two ends of that thing. And I think the question is, to answer your question, if I have to import glass from Germany to be green building compliant, and then I, of course, do some maths to say that over 5 years, that energy cost is saved here, complex math. But the fact remains that I'm consuming much more. And that consumption is going to hit us somewhere or the other all the time. That's my sense of it. It's just another form of consumption. That's it. We are not becoming frugal. That's the problem. Okay. So I really don't, I've never been enamored by this rating thing. Though we have to do it as we practice, but to me it's not. The questions are far too deep-rooted. This is a marketing thing, right? I put that little block in front of my building that I'm a platinum-rated building, and everybody feels, wow, I've done my job for this world, right? But that's not how it is.
Thank you, sir. So we have another question. I'll just ask you. Over the years of experience in the industry, the surroundings remain undesigned or rather untouched by a government, specifically in NCR. Just an example.
Sorry, come again.
Yeah, over the period of time, the surroundings remain undesigned or rather untouched by a government, specifically in NCR. I'm speaking with the terms of availability of municipal services before they actually open a piece of land to develop by a private player. How about the flow and what are your thoughts about it, sir?
Right. Very good question. So it is, if you begin to think about how we want our environments, then I am talking of an imagination where there is no need for anybody to do any infrastructure in terms of, at least for my building, right? I will generate the beauty of when we go to any of these traditional things. That was, of course, by compulsion. Let's face it, okay? There were not many choices, and there was only that way that you could do it. But it did create a culture and a way of enjoying a certain. So if you go to Rajasthan with 60 mm of rain, they lived, survived, were the best craftsmen, and the kings were the best guys who were doing great job in astronomy, science, you name it, right? So with no external support really. So that is what builds culture and practice. So to me, the idea of the municipal infrastructure becoming a predetermining thing itself is a little problematic. One of the things that actually, when you read that Ishwar Ahluwalia's report, you realize that it's almost not possible for, it's very clear in my head that the government cannot, it's just a mammoth task to be able to develop infrastructure for everything and build as much as, we need to. That's not going to happen. Public participation, local level action committee, local action groups is where, and that's why I think the digital technology will come into play. That how do we network? How do we connect? How do we? Well, I'm talking about the future. I'm not worried about now. What the bio. So one of the things that I actually, when I read the brief, I felt that it might be worthwhile taking off that condition of saying that you follow the NBC, because then you're putting everybody in the same frame, right? There is no room for any imagination.
Right.
So I mean, I just thought that you're already bound that imagination within a formal way of thinking, which is what I am questioning, or which is what the next generation must question. If you tell me to follow, then I'm done. Then I'm not a creator. I mean, of course, I can be creative within the framework of the norms. I'm not saying you can't be, but I think for competitions, like this is one of the things. I mean, we grew as a practice through competitions, and the beauty of competitions is that you have a brief, but you don't have a client across to say, "Nee, nee, nee, aisa nahi chahiye," right? Or you're not discussing. And we have always used all our competitions to express a design position, right?
Absolutely. So it adds like a bar to our creativity,
Yeah.
to our thought, expressions of thoughts. So it confines it at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you. So any thoughts on biophilic architecture?
Well, these are all parts, and these are parts of the same mechanism of respecting the environment or engaging with it. So it's all the same thing. I mean, it's not. These are theoretical pockets within the larger objective of respecting nature. So I really don't. I can't draw very thin, thick lines between what Merkert says and biophilic architecture and all of it. It's all put in a certain framework as you think, but all of it is heading towards the same thing.
Absolutely, sir. So there's one more question, sir. At
Yeah.
present world, can be considered energy hunger. Different approaches are carried out to save energy. How do you visualize if humankind step towards producing more clean energy rather than saving?
Of course, I mean, but there is. I mean, why would one not want clean energy? I mean, I don't see. The problem is fossil. No? One of the biggest problem is our fossil consumption. Let's say fossil-based consumption. So it's be it mineral resources, right, or be it stone for construction, or be it. So, for example, if I said to myself that I am going to construct with what I can grow, and I make my site also a place where I can grow something which can, over the next 3 years or 25 years, I can reuse it in construction, and I can create another generation, right? So now it's pointing towards another architecture. So I am not going and scratching any hill to get my stone, because again, we also have this imagination that if we build with stone, it's natural and local and all of that. But try and imagine a city of Mumbai built with stone. With Malad stone and basalt stone, we would have to scrape all the Western Ghats around there to build that Mumbai city. So obviously there are some and deeply entrenched questions about these things. So even in terms of clean energy means what? Now, are we saying so? If we talk about battery, I just gave you an example of how somebody just gave an example about how if we have to really make those many batteries for this entire world to meet all its energy demands, then we don't have enough surface to actually mine material for it. So it's not. I don't think there is a single answer to this question. We are in a time frame, in a time balloon where we really have to whack our heads and think this through. I don't think anybody will have a very definite answer. But the question to me is: are you asking that question? And as a student or as a designer, that's the most important thing. Are you asking that question constantly with a pencil in your hand, or whatever, pen in your hand, or a?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. And with that, I would like to head towards the close and vote of thanks. So with sustainable landscapes, we are actually shaping an ecosystem that connects the real world with the urban landscapes and speciality, making decisions and planning for sustainable approach for the nature, by the nature, because of the nature. We should together transform the everyday for a better tomorrow.
I'd like to thank Ravi for sharing some of his thoughts. And I think he's laid down a beautiful vision at a very high level, and which would be very inspiring for the students to understand. Like, you're thinking at a very different level for students at a much higher level. But only one thing which I like to highlight from a sustainable perspective is and what's been said by many people, that we are right now fighting for sustainability for ourselves, not for Earth. Earth will sustain. Earth
Yeah.
will continue.
Sure.
It's only for our own humankind is like what we must do all these things. So we should remember that we are doing it for ourselves, not for Earth, because Earth has survived millions of years and it will continue to survive. And how can we really ensure that we survive as a species? Is
Yeah.
all this discussion is about that.
Yeah.
And of course, we see a huge movement happening since pandemic. It's of course multiplied so many times, and I'm sure with the current effect which we are already seeing now, year on year increasing, it'll become super critical in next few. But we have to start. We should have started early, but even anyway, it's never late to start, and it's all towards that. But like Ravi has laid down some very high level, but very important and critical things that even at a vision level, how do we think and what do we think, and what are the things we start putting as a corrective action is what you have laid down. I think it's a food for thought for all of us to go through.
Yeah. And I'd like to actually, hopefully some of them at least begin to kind of construct these questions in their design. When you design, you understand what your design questions are. So
Yes. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you very
Thanks.
much. And thank you all the participants for attending, and especially for the young students who are at the early careers of design, some of the thoughts. Anyway, we'll also share, I think he has raised a lot of critical questions, which will take a little bit more time to digest. So we'll be sharing the recording to all of them if you want to go through that again. Thank you, Ravi. Yeah, now on back to you.
That's it. Thank you so much, and would like to close today's session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. Right. Bye-bye.